Hello and welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore, and it's great to be with you again this week. Friends, we're back in the saddle. Happy New Year. Once again, it's 2025, and the legislative session is just around the corner. I took a few weeks over the break to pause, to listen, to be alone with my own thoughts, which is honestly not as scary as one would think. But I realized that going post-election into the holiday season, I was spending a lot of time and a lot of emotional energy on trying to consume as much political content from smart people as I could, to listen to as many experts, whether it's hot takes or well-informed think pieces about what the election means for America and what the future looks like. And it was making me insane. My justification was that if I listen to all this, if I digest as much good information as I can, then I will use that information to make better informed decisions here for my state in Oklahoma. And along the way, what I realized is that most people, right, we'll use Ezra Klein as an example. He's a resilient fellow. I think he's smart. I think he's got an interesting perspective, but his job, he is required to produce a certain amount of content every week, right? Blog posts, podcasts, same thing with 538 or Nate Silver. And this is not to diminish any of them, but when you're pumping out that much original thoughts, it's not all going to be winners, right? They're not all great. No artist sits down and paints a picture and thinks every one of these is a masterpiece. That's not how it works. And as we got towards the end of the year, I was like, a lot of these are wrap-up pieces, and it just feels like they're trying to regurgitate some of the same principles that they've said or they've heard from somebody else. And I also don't think we had enough perspective, enough time, enough distance, enough data to make well-informed decisions. So somewhere in mid-December, I turned it off. I hit stop. I switched over to listening to music. Thankfully, I love Christmas music. It was a great time for that. I spent a lot of time doing household projects, doing woodworking in my garage without even music on, without the West Wing on, without anything, just silence. And an interesting thing happened. In the first few minutes, hours were ripe with anxiety. I was really stressed out about I should be doing something. I should be learning. I should be listening. I should be consuming something right now, with this feeling that I was supposed to, that it was important, that my job was to filter things through for you or for, other organizations. And as I held fast and that subsided, I began to realize that I had some thoughts in there too, right? You have suddenly the space and the time to deconstruct some of the themes, the ideas, excuse me, some of the things that I had read and heard, and think about them myself, and just to put things together in a different way, right? And that was really helpful. And by the end of the break, I had found some hope again. I had found a purpose. I was reminded along the way, right? When I'm not just piping information into my brain all day long from other people, but when I have a chance to look up and look around at the sky, at the birds, at the people, and listen to all of the other conversations that are happening out there that aren't directly about, red, blue, right, left, us, them, but just to spend time with family and friends and music and nature and animals. I was reminded of what really matters in this world, and maybe more importantly for our purposes here, what the role is or should be of Let's Fix This in the Oklahoma landscape. And so I am now in the process of talking to my board and putting some of these thoughts and ideas into a plan, into metrics, into concrete, targeted, just doing the work, doing things, right? Events, whether it's democracy drinks, happy hours, whether it's kumbaya kind of connection events, whether it's candidate forums, whether it's all this stuff, right? So anyway, I'm putting the cart before the horse, even mentioning this to you But I'm saying this to say, thank you for listening. I hope this is still helpful to you. If you need to take a break, that's okay. Hopefully you did as well. Hopefully you spent some time over the break taking a break, right? You spent time with friends and family and food and pets and all that. Hopefully this week you got some snow days. When I left the house this morning, my neighbor was outside playing with her 2 boys in the snow. They played all day yesterday. It looks like tons of fun. My daughter was sick, so we were in the house all day yesterday. I didn't get to play in the snow, but I did live vicariously through my neighbors this morning, watching her just drop a snowball on her son's head. That seemed kind of fulfilling to me. All right, well, the legislative session is just around the corner, so we've got a jam-packed episode for you today on the podcast. At the end, there are 3 upcoming events that I want you to know about, particularly if you live in Norman or Oklahoma City. I know many of you do. I'm rebuilding our whole calendar on the website. There's a lot of stuff that'll be coming down the pipe here in the next few weeks. But grab a pen and paper. We'll come back to that here towards the end of the episode. And also, we've got something new for you today. We've got some new correspondents that will be joining us here in a few minutes. All right, well, let's get into it, right? This week, Tuesday, the 7th, was organizational day for the Oklahoma Legislature, which is the day when the members come together to formally elect the leaders of each caucus and in each chamber. They vote on the rules that they themselves will operate by for the next year or maybe 2. And I think they take new headshots, like new photos. I don't know if they actually did that on Tuesday or not, but I've seen a lot of them get posted on social media. So maybe it's like the school picture day as well. But more on organizational day later on. I was thinking about this week. I'm honestly not clear on when the legislature begins. People ask me this, and I should know this, and I think I forget every year. Organizational day seems like it would be the official start, but some people say that the legislature isn't really in session until, the first Monday in February. This year, that falls on February 3rd. That's the day that the governor gives his State of the State address. And I think that's when the legislature formally gavels into session. I think maybe that's it, right? So organizational day is the first day of the legislature, right? And as you may recall, the legislature is a 2-year cohort, right? So after an even numbered year, like 2024, there's an election and we elect. All of the new House seats are theoretically up for election, and then half the Senate. And so when all of those people are in office, the next legislature begins, and essentially it's a 2-year time, right? Because the House has 2-year terms. And so we just began the 60th Oklahoma Legislature. You can think of this as like a lineup for the legislature, right? Like a team roster, right? It's a 2-year term cohort. And so each legislature will have at least 2 regular sessions, 1 each year. And then they might have, 1 or more extraordinary or special sessions along the way, right? So the legislature has begun with organizational day, means that's the beginning of the legislature, but the first regular session doesn't start until the first Monday in February. And I think that's constitutional in the state constitution. And I know that they must adjourn the regular session by the last Friday in May. Anyway, on organizational day, the Senate published its schedule for all of their chamber deadlines, and it is unusually detailed when it comes to bill filing. There are 7 deadline dates this month alone, and we're already like a third of the way through. One of those is for organizational day itself, and then the other 6 relate to bill filing, and they stipulate things as specific as, quote, final draft revisions due to drafters by senators at 4 p.m. on January 15th. Like that is a very specific deadline. So there's 7 things in January, and then for the entire rest of session, right, from February through May, there's only 6 deadlines, and those are like the usual floor deadlines, committee deadlines, that kind of stuff, and then sine die at the end. And I guess the first day, I guess that's second reading. Anyway, it just struck me that incoming pro tem Lonnie Paxton and his leadership team was like, we want to be very precise on how bills are getting filed. And I think this builds on the last couple of years, especially in the Senate, of them trying to like rein in this like madhouse, chaotic bill filing where there's thousands of bills filed. A lot of them are not worth hearing. It makes it really complicated and messy. And so I think this is an effort to say, hey, get your shit together, get it written, get it filed, and then we will proceed. But they really want to cut back on the number of like shell bills, I think, that are floating around. That's a lot of it. So that's good, I think. As of today, or when I last checked, the House has not published their entire deadline schedule the way that the Senate has. The House only had like 3 things on their calendar. It was like really organizational day, first day, last day of session. But the House has published their committee schedule. And again, we've, a new speaker in the House, a new pro tem in the Senate, new leadership teams in both chambers. And that means some subtle tweaks to the rules and the committee structure. That's not uncommon. Even when it's the same speaker, they would often change things year to year, trying to improve or tweak things to reflect current needs or trends. And I think now with new people in those offices, it is expected that we would see some interesting changes. At first, in the House, I was surprised to see that the Appropriations and Budget Committee is scheduled to meet every day of the week, Monday through Thursday. The schedule actually has them listed on Monday mornings at 9 a.m. and at 10:30 a.m., as well as Monday afternoon, Tuesday afternoon, and Wednesday afternoon, all at 4:30, and then one more time on Thursdays at 1:30. But then I scrolled down and I saw a footnote on the calendar that says, quote, the A and B committee develops its own meeting schedule and that of the subcommittees. So I don't think they're going to be meeting every day. We'll just wait to see what they do. It would be really unusual for the A and B committee to meet so early on Monday morning, as well as so late in the afternoon on some of these other days. A lot of rural legislators go home to their districts on the weekends and they don't come back. They usually drive in on Monday. Some come in Sunday night, but some don't come in until Monday early. And so they usually don't start things until around like 10 o'clock or sometimes even the afternoon on Mondays. I think as we get later in session, which is when the A and B committee is probably more active, we might see more of those like Monday morning meetings, as well as some of those late afternoon meetings. So maybe they're just laying the groundwork for what might need to be in place in, say, April and May. I mean, to be clear, I'm not opposed to like Monday morning meetings. I'd love to see legislators at the Capitol working on things. And theoretically, at least, more meetings means that there will be more time for thoughtful discussion about important issues. Or it could just mean that there's more time for inane shenanigans that distract the legislature and the public away from important issues. We'll find out. But speaking of distraction, the bill filing deadline is next Thursday, January 16th, and that means that this week and next week and probably the week after, you will hear about many, many bad and ridiculous bills. In the media, on social media for sure. There's a few good ones too, God willing, but undoubtedly this small cabal of legislators who seem to like to govern by press release will find themselves in the limelight for a few brief moments, as they do every year. I several years ago signed up to receive all of the press releases from the legislature. You can go online and do it. And I think overall it's been a helpful way to stay informed about what's happening at the Capitol during session. But to be honest, there's like 3 or 4 guys who send out a disproportionate number of press releases about absolutely wacky stuff, or like their statements on every little thing that comes down from Washington. And it's the volume, the proportion of wacky to worthwhile in my inbox gets tipped so far in the wacky direction that I often consider unsubscribing from the whole list. But I persist because it's important, and maybe I can subscribe so that you don't have to, right? I like to joke that I hit Grown Alt Delete when I sort through all that mess. That's a computer nerd joke for those of you who are my fellow computer nerds. All right. Well, speaking of computer nerds, we've got a new feature for you today, friends. And I've got some mixed feelings about it, so I just want to tell you about it up front. Now, if you've listened to our show for a while, you've probably figured out that I am not just a political nerd, but also a regular nerd, as in like I like math and science and computers and Star Trek and bicycles and stuff. Anyway, AI is all the rage, and I have spent a lot of time always poking around with all these new AI tools to see what they can do and if there's anything that's worthwhile. And by and large, it's like interesting but not useful to me. There's some things that are better than others. I really like Anthropic's AI tool, which is called Claude. I subscribe to that one because I find that one really smart and really useful. It can help like write code for stuff, which is interesting and helpful because I'm not a coder. But overall, I think I've struggled to find ways for me to use AI that is actually beneficial to me or my work until now, I think. So this week, I learned about a tool that Google has released that's called Notebook LM. I assume LM stands for language model or large model. I don't know. Lazy mongoose. I don't really know what it stands for, but supposedly it's designed to like help students with studying, and it definitely could. It's pretty rad. You can add sources, sites like websites, PDFs, stuff you've written. You can link to your Google Docs, whatever. You can put it all in, and then it will synthesize all that information for you. And one of the features that I like most is that it takes the source text, like books or news articles, and then from those sources, it creates an audio conversation between two people, two AI voices. And from those, like using that source text as the basis for the conversation. So like it, quote, reads the material and then they discuss it and you can listen to it like a podcast. It basically makes a podcast conversation between two people about something that was written, which I get is like what we do here. And in any given week, like I read a bunch of articles and I put them into a spreadsheet. And at the end of the week, I usually compile them and try to make some notes to talk about them. And, when it's just me, sometimes you're just subjected to a long diatribe from me about what's happening in the state. And while some of you have said that's, great and you enjoy it, I'm not Rush Limbaugh. Like, I don't necessarily have an opinion on everything, and I have limited time. Now, we're working on, getting some additional guests and co-hosts in here this year to kind of bring back some of the energy that we've had in the past. But in the interim, or to supplement that, I'm going to lean on these AI voices, or at least we're going to try them out. I'm not going to lean on them. I'm just going to try them out today. And then I need you to tell me if it's good or bad. So, we usually do some sort of news roundup as part of our show, and I think this is maybe a useful tool to keep you in the loop about what's happening, but not force you to listen to, my voice for that full hour every week. And for those of you who I can hear rolling your eyes already, hear me when I say I'm serious, that like this thing blew me away. Like it's legitimately fascinating. And the way that I'm working is I've got it queued up in the background. I'm going to hit play in a second, and it's going to play into my recording feed, and I'm going to listen to it along with you. And then I'll give my little brief feedback at the end. It's about 22 minutes long, the little podcast it created, and then we'll wrap up. And I've got a few other things at the end of the episode. So what I need you to do is listen to it with an open mind, and then send me an email, right? Send an email to podcast@letsfixthis.org and let me know, pump or dump, like just thumbs up, thumbs down, whatever. How did you feel about it? Was it useful? Was it helpful? Was anything inaccurate, right? I'm going to be listening for inaccuracies because that's a thing that happens with AI. I'm hoping it doesn't make up information. If there's anything I note, I'll be sure to flag it at the end. All right, so I'm calling these our new Capitol correspondents, Adam and Izzy, right? AI, get it? Okay, that's a bad joke, but you understand. They're going to give us a news roundup from the past few weeks. And then, like I said, you're going to let me know if this is good or bad. Don't worry, like I'm not going anywhere. We'll still bring many guests on the show. And as a side note, this is episode 280, which means that we are very likely to hit episode 300 sometime during session this year. And that is absolutely mind-blowing. And 300 doesn't seem like a big number in today's world of like, $1 trillion budgets, but that's basically 300 weeks of episodes that we've done. And that is a long time, like a very long time. That's wild. Okay, well, without further ado, let's go to Adam and Izzy for the news.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to be looking at some recent articles from NonDoc and Oklahoma Watch.
Okay.
And they all explore kind of the intersection of politics, justice, and education here in Oklahoma.
All right.
You gave us a really interesting mix of stuff to go through, really.
Yeah.
Everything from controversial legal battles and proposed school enrollment rules all the way to a little peek into how state employees are working these days.
It is interesting, how all these seemingly very separate topics actually all touch on this idea of accountability.
Yeah.
In Oklahoma government, we see it in this push to reform how state officials are selected and removed. Questions about due process in these big high-profile legal cases.
Yeah.
And even just the changing landscape of state employee telework.
Let's jump right in with Governor Stitt's proposal to change how we're selecting statewide officials.
Okay.
He wants to kind of do away with elections for most of these positions and instead have the governor appoint them.
So Stitt's argument is that this system would make it super clear who's actually responsible for how these officials are performing. It'd be like, that one neck to choke accountability that voters often want.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
He believes it'll streamline decision-making and allow for quicker action, if an official just isn't meeting expectations.
Stitt has pointed to states like Florida and Texas as examples where roles like the state superintendent of education and insurance commissioner are already appointed positions.
Right.
But it's not exactly smooth sailing, is it?
No, not really. There's definitely pushback. Some lawmakers are arguing that this system puts way too much power in the hands of the governor, and it could potentially just sideline the will of the voters.
Mm-hmm.
And plus, there's the question of if it would actually improve accountability or just shift it even further away from the people.
It makes you think, what are the long-term implications of such a huge change?
Yeah.
Could it lead to a situation where the governor's priorities just overshadow the needs of different communities all across the state?
Yeah, and that question becomes even more pressing when you look at, what's going on with Corporation Commissioner Todd Hite.
Right.
Despite those allegations of sexual battery against him and even calls for his resignation from other lawmakers, there really aren't many clear ways to actually remove an elected official from office in Oklahoma besides impeachment.
It's almost ironic, I guess, given that Hite himself previously called for the resignation of other officials accused of misconduct.
Right.
It really highlights how hard it is to navigate allegations against these powerful people, making sure there's due process, but also trying to, hold them accountable.
It really is. And, it's not just about Oklahoma. We've seen these same challenges all over the country in holding elected officials accountable for alleged misconduct. It almost makes you wonder if this is a systemic issue. And if it is, what can we even do about it?
Yeah. Are there other ways to address these situations beyond the often really long and really political process of impeachment?
Exactly.
It's complicated, isn't it?
It is.
There's this tension between wanting to uphold the will of the voters who put these officials in office, but also wanting to make sure that they're held to a high standard of conduct.
Exactly.
And this case with Hite highlights how personal behavior can actually potentially really impact an official's ability to carry out their duties effectively and impartially.
And we see this play out, in that legal challenge brought by those 3 Republican lawmakers who were trying to disqualify Hite from voting on cases that involve companies connected to his accusers.
So they're claiming that as OG&E customers themselves, they are directly affected by the rate increase that Hite voted for.
Yeah.
And so they have a vested interest in making sure that he's...
Right. They're arguing he can't make impartial decisions about these companies because of the allegations against him.
It's a very unique legal strategy.
It is.
Yeah.
Their argument basically boils down to this idea of captive customers.
Right.
And in this case, it means that because they rely on OGE
right.
and can't just choose another provider, they're super vulnerable to decisions made by the Corporation Commission.
Right.
And they believe that Haidt's alleged actions create a conflict of interest that just,
right.
really jeopardizes their interests as captive customers.
It brings up this much bigger question about, how we address these kinds of situations outside of impeachment, right?
Exactly.
It seems like these lawmakers are looking for another way to hold Haidt accountable.
They are. And their efforts are really shining a light on a big question. How can we guarantee that elected officials are not only accountable for, their actions as officials, but also for their conduct that could potentially undermine their ability to fairly and impartially serve the public?
It's a fascinating legal and ethical challenge.
It really is.
And I'm really interested to see how this all plays out.
Me too.
But while we're on the topic of legal battles, we have to look at this class action lawsuit regarding Oklahoma's competency restoration system. This lawsuit really highlights a system that seems to be failing some of the most vulnerable people in our society.
It does.
It claims that Oklahoma is violating the rights of people who are deemed mentally incompetent while awaiting trial. And this is because of the big backlogs in competency restoration services.
It's heartbreaking to think about people just trapped in this system, for years. Simply because they can't access the treatment they need to be deemed competent to stand trial.
It's a stark reminder that behind all these legal arguments are real people whose lives are being completely changed because of how these systems are working, or in this case, not working.
And the proposed settlement, while it is facing its own legal challenges, it does offer, a glimmer of hope. The fact that it includes ways to create a more comprehensive and sustainable system. Including those community-based competency restoration models. It's a good step forward.
I agree. Community-based care could be a game changer, offering a more humane and potentially less expensive alternative to being put in an institution. But like you said, it's not without its challenges, is it?
No, not at all. A judge actually ruled that a part of this settlement, the part that would allow for those community-based services, is actually illegal under Oklahoma law.
Oh, wow.
So it shows we need legislative action, even if this settlement is approved. It's clear that lawmakers have to address the legal framework around competency restoration to create a system that works and is fair.
And then on top of that, Governor Stitt is now saying that the whole legislature needs to approve the settlement because the legislative session has officially started.
So it seems like there's potential for some power struggles here.
It raises those questions about who gets to decide how these services are provided and funded. And it shows how important it is for the executive and legislative branches to work together when tackling these big, complicated issues.
Absolutely.
Speaking of complicated issues, we've got to talk about Attorney General Gentner Drummond. And the splash he's making by taking over these high-profile cases and sometimes dismissing charges. It's definitely raising some eyebrows.
Especially in cases where his actions seem to contradict the findings of, other officials. Drummond's actions are making people talk a lot about the role of the Attorney General, how much power they really have. Some people love that he's willing to step in when he thinks justice hasn't been served. While others worry that he might be going too far and undermining other law enforcement agencies.
One case that really shows these different points of view is the case of Oklahoma City Police skate Joseph Gibson, who was charged with assault for how he handled an elderly man during a traffic stop. Drummond decided to drop the charge, saying that Gibson was just following his training.
But the internal affairs officer who looked into the case found the use of force to be unreasonable.
Oh, wow.
Which directly contradicts what Drummond said.
So this difference of opinion brings up important questions about what's considered reasonable force and who actually gets to decide which cases to pursue.
It makes you think about, the bigger picture of Drummond's actions. Is he setting a precedent that could actually hurt public trust in law enforcement? Or make it harder to hold officers accountable for misconduct?
That's a valid point, and it shows how delicate the balance is between supporting law enforcement and also making sure they're held to high standards of conduct.
This is a debate that goes way beyond this case,
Right.
It touches on what we believe about law enforcement, the use of force,
right,
and the pursuit of justice in our society.
And it brings up this really fundamental question.
Yeah.
How do we make sure the legal system serves both the interests of public safety and the rights of individuals?
Right.
Especially in those,
gray areas.
Those gray areas where it's tough to tell the difference between
Right.
what's allowed and what's excessive force.
It's a conversation that we need to have.
And it's one we're going to keep exploring as we go deeper into these articles.
Sounds good. It seems like Drummond isn't afraid of controversy at all.
Yeah.
His approach is definitely making people think about how we can balance accountability with respecting the decisions made by law enforcement.
Right.
And, speaking of navigating these sticky situations,
yeah,
the Oklahoma Department of Education is proposing these new rules that are causing a lot of debate.
Yeah.
They want students to prove that they're citizens or have legal immigration status to enroll in public schools.
This feels like it's walking a very fine line legally.
It does.
I mean, doesn't federal law usually prevent schools from asking about immigration status to determine residency?
Right. Critics are saying this could create a chilling effect,
Yeah.
It might scare undocumented children away from school out of fear, which brings up concerns about discrimination and conflicts with federal law that's meant to protect the right to education for all kids, regardless of their immigration status.
It seems like this proposal highlights something we see a lot in Oklahoma, where state law is pushing one way and federal law is pulling another.
Right.
And it's these kids stuck in the middle.
And it makes you wonder about what's really behind this proposal.
Yeah.
I mean, is it actually about figuring out their educational needs, like the Department of Education claims? Or is there something else going on here?
Right. And what could happen, not just legally, but for these vulnerable students in our communities?
Exactly. It's a conversation that's happening all over the country, too.
Yeah.
Not just in Oklahoma.
Right.
These debates about immigration and education.
But let's shift gears a little
Okay.
and talk about something that probably affects you more directly.
Okay.
Governor Stitt's executive order to end telework for state employees.
All right.
This really surprised a lot of people.
It did.
Especially since he supported flexible work in the past.
Stitt's reason for this change is that he wants to increase accountability in service delivery.
Right.
But he was praising telework before even telling that story about Cody.
Right.
Who got a promotion without having to move. So this reversal seems pretty sudden.
It feels like there's more to it.
It does.
Some lawmakers are pushing back, saying telework is important for attracting and keeping good employees.
Right, especially in rural areas.
Yeah, where those commutes can be long and there aren't as many job options.
This is making us rethink what work looks like after the pandemic. How can we have the benefits of telework, like flexibility and a good work-life balance, but still have collaboration and in-person interaction?
Yeah.
And how do we measure how productive people are in this new world of work?
Honestly, those are questions I'm struggling with myself.
Yeah.
This whole pandemic thing has really made me rethink what's important to me and how I want to structure my work.
It's a conversation a lot of us are having.
Yeah.
The pandemic forced us to adapt and try new ways of working. And now we're trying to figure out how to make those changes last.
It's like we're all trying to figure out what work even means anymore.
It really is.
But let's zoom out for a sec and look at the bigger political picture in Oklahoma.
Right.
There's a lot going on right now.
Yeah.
From a Supreme Court vacancy to this renewed push for open primaries.
The upcoming Supreme Court vacancy is really interesting.
It is.
With Justice Yvonne Cogger losing her retention election, the way they pick her replacement, which involves the Judicial Nominating Commission and a gubernatorial appointment, is under a lot of scrutiny.
And this isn't happening out of nowhere, right?
No, not at all. A bunch of other justices barely won their recent retention elections.
Yeah.
Which shows how politics are getting more and more involved in the judiciary, not just in Oklahoma, but everywhere.
It really makes you think.
It does.
How do we make sure we're picking qualified judges who are impartial?
Right.
Especially when there's so much political pressure.
Exactly.
The Judicial Nominating Commission has a big role to play here.
They do.
Can you break down how the JNC works for those of us who aren't legal experts?
So the JNC has both attorneys and regular people on it.
Okay.
And they're in charge of vetting people who apply for these judicial vacancies. They look over applications, do interviews, and then they give the governor a list of 3 nominees, and the governor picks one.
So it's a mix of legal expertise and politics.
It is.
It's an interesting process.
It is.
And it makes you wonder how we balance the need for qualified judges with wanting the people to have a say.
Right.
And speaking of elections,
yeah,
the push for open primaries is back.
It is.
With the refiled initiative petition.
Yep.
Now it's called State Question 836.
This is a huge deal. If it passes, it'll completely change how elections work here.
Right.
All registered voters, no matter their party, could vote in any primary.
Right.
And the top 2 candidates, regardless of party, would go to the general election.
This has caused a lot of debate around the country.
It has.
People who support it say it leads to more moderate candidates and makes people focus more on issues that appeal to more voters.
Right.
But critics are worried about what could go wrong.
Yeah, like could it weaken political parties?
Right.
And make it harder for them to represent their values? Could it lead to strategic voting?
Right.
Or even people from the other party trying to sabotage things?
It's hard to know for sure what it would do to Oklahoma's political landscape.
It is.
But it's definitely something we should talk about.
Definitely.
This initiative could really shake things up.
It could.
And speaking of shaking things up, we can't forget about the new House Speaker.
Right.
Kyle Hilbert. He's the youngest speaker in state history.
He is.
And he's bringing new ideas and priorities.
He's got a really ambitious agenda for the 2025 session.
He does.
Tackling some big problems facing Oklahoma.
Right, like the state budget, reducing cell phone use in schools, and those workforce shortages we've been talking about.
His approach to the budget is really interesting.
Yeah.
He's all about transparency and accountability.
Okay.
Even launched a website where people can give feedback on budget proposals.
Wow.
It's a bold move, letting the public see everything.
It seems like he's really trying to connect with the people.
He is. And focusing on reducing cell phone use in schools is something a lot of parents and teachers are worried about.
Right. They're worried about how technology is affecting learning.
It's a bigger conversation about the role of technology in our lives. And it'll be interesting to see what policies come from this.
And then there's the workforce shortages that are affecting everyone in Oklahoma. Hilbert has said he's looking for new solutions. He knows just throwing money at the problem won't work.
He's talking about creating a culture that values education, skills, and career advancement.
Yeah.
Especially in rural communities.
Right.
And he wants to address the root causes of these shortages.
Okay.
Like affordable housing, access to child care, and transportation.
So a more holistic approach.
Exactly.
It sounds like he's really trying to fix the problem at its core.
He is. And that focus on rural communities is so important.
Yeah.
They're often hit the hardest by these shortages.
Right.
So it's great to see a leader who cares about their needs.
It's clear Hilbert's bringing new energy and ideas to his role.
He is.
We'll see how he handles the challenges that come with leading such a diverse group of people.
Right.
But it's exciting to watch what's happening in the House.
It is.
Wow, we covered a lot today.
It did.
It's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting to see how all of this connects.
It is.
Politics, justice, education, they're all part of Oklahoma's story.
It shows how connected these issues are.
Yeah.
What happens in the legislature affects our schools and courts.
Right.
And the decisions those in power make affect every community.
It also reminds us that we all have a part to play in shaping Oklahoma's future.
We do.
Whether we're voting, contacting our officials, volunteering, or just having these conversations.
Right.
We all have a voice, and we need to use it.
And that brings us to an important point in our deep dive.
Okay.
We've explored how complicated Oklahoma politics are, the challenges facing our justice system, and what's being done to ensure good education for everyone.
Right.
But now it's time to think about what all of this means for you, the listener.
What stuck with you? What surprised you? And most importantly, what questions do you have as you navigate this complex world? We really dove into some heavy stuff today.
We did.
Allegations of misconduct and legal battles, proposed policy changes, even shifts in how we work.
It's a lot to process.
It is, but it's also really fascinating to see how all these pieces fit together to tell the story of what's happening in Oklahoma.
It's interesting how all these stories that seem so different actually come back to a few key themes.
Right. Like we've seen how the idea of accountability shows up everywhere, from holding officials responsible to making sure people accused of crimes get a fair legal process.
And we've seen how hard it is to balance all these different interests and opinions.
Yeah, like take education, for instance.
Okay.
You have this proposed rule about students proving citizenship, which is raising concerns about access to education for undocumented kids. And that bumps up against federal law that's supposed to protect those rights.
It shows that constant tension we see in Oklahoma between the state and federal government.
Right. And it makes you wonder how we navigate those clashes in a way that protects everyone's rights while still respecting, you know, how our government is set up.
Exactly.
Another thing that really hit me is how Oklahoma is facing both progress and conflict as it moves forward.
It's like we see hope in things like that.
Right.
That potential settlement in the mental health lawsuit.
Yeah.
And the new House Speaker's focus on transparency. But there's also a chance for more division.
Right.
Especially on topics like open primaries.
Yeah.
Where people have really strong political opinions. And things like telework.
Right.
Where what state agencies need and what employees want might not match up.
It reminds you that change is never easy or straightforward.
It isn't.
There are going to be bumps in the road, disagreements, times when it feels like we're going backwards.
Right. But the important thing is to stay involved.
Yeah.
Keep learning, keep pushing for the future we want, even when it's tough.
Right. The stories we talked about today show how important it is to be engaged citizens.
Absolutely. They show how powerful it can be to ask those tough questions and demand that people in power are held accountable.
Right. We've seen how people can use the legal system to challenge policies they think are unfair.
Yeah.
How they can hold officials to a higher standard and how they can fight for changes that make their communities better.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we encourage you to keep exploring these topics. Dig into the things that caught your attention.
Right.
Read more about the people and groups involved.
Yeah.
And most importantly, think about what role you want to play in shaping Oklahoma's future.
We've given you a lot to think about today.
We have.
But this is just the start of the conversation.
It is.
We hope this deep dive has made you curious, inspired you to think critically, and giving you the tools to really engage with the issues facing our state.
Because the future of Oklahoma really does depend on its people being active and involved.
Right.
It's about staying informed, staying engaged,
and staying committed to building a state that's just and fair and successful for everyone.
Okay, well, thanks, Adam and Izzy, for that wonderful recap. That was kind of wild, right? Kind of cool. There's some mispronunciations like Jitner instead of Gittner, Drummond, and clearly they don't know how to read abbreviations. I think there was one point where it was the word sergeant was shortened to SGT period, and they tried to pronounce that as like Sigit. Anyway, and a couple of blips where it sounded like Adam and Izzy were mumbling a little bit. There was a lot of verbal affirmations back and forth, or like those little, yeah, really, right, okay. They felt a little over the top, but maybe that's how, Scott and I or other guests are. I've never paid attention to how much I say it. And there was one point where my phone rang and the sound came through in the laptop. That's my fault. But that kind of stuff happens with humans too. Clearly, it was a human error. So anyway, it's probably easy to focus on some of those small blips, but overall, I thought it was pretty interesting and surprisingly conversational. And I didn't write any of that. I didn't write any of the script. I literally just pasted in links to news articles, and it did everything, including the part at the end where they're like, hey, here's the questions you should ask. Here's what you can do. Here's why it's important. That is like shit that I would write. And they did it on their own. So hats off to Google. We'll see if that's useful. As I said earlier, please let me know if you want to, if you like it or not. Let me know. All right. I want to end with a personal note about three, I think, amazing Americans who have died recently. Former President Jimmy Carter, Oklahoma philanthropist Gene Rainbolt, and Oklahoma community organizer and my friend Roxanne Logan. Now, I didn't know Jimmy Carter. He was out of office before I was born, and while history may not look back on his presidency particularly favorably, I'm confident that we will look back on the man himself with very high esteem. Jimmy Carter's a man, might not have been an economist, but he might have been a saint. This week, National Day of Mourning was yesterday for him. Undoubtedly, you've seen news stories. Take a chance, read a little bit. If you aren't familiar with his legacy and what he's done, especially since he was in office, you should. It is to me, a textbook description of what an ex-president should be like. Secondly, Gene Rainbolt. I met Gene on 2 occasions. Once about 5 years ago when I was asking him for funding for our campaign against gerrymandering, which I had heard was one of his top personal policy issues. He said no, or at least not yet, to that funding ask. And I was so nervous that meeting. The second time I met him was just 2 months ago in November. He reached out to me because he wanted to, again, discuss how we could end gerrymandering. He had some ideas, and he wanted to talk about the open primary and like how we can expand open primaries to all voters in Oklahoma. He was energetic. He was intelligent. He was gracious. In our conversation, we hung out for about an hour, and he asked me, where I went to school, and where I got my MBA, and I smiled and I said, well, the OU Gene Rainbolt Graduate School of Business, of course. And he kind of chuckled and maybe blushed a little bit and said, he didn't need his name on that building. He just wanted Oklahomans to get a good education. Gene Rainbolt had a tremendous flex move and wrote his own obituary. And looking back now, I am certain he knew the end was near when he reached out to me in November and was trying to leave his legacy in a personal way, right? Not just in words, but in time that he spent in his last, several weeks of life. And it worked. Man, that stuck with me. He did not promise me any money during that conversation either. But he did leave a mark on me that I did not expect. So he'll be missed sorely by our state. He did a tremendous amount of good. And also he's a big fan of Willie Nelson, which I appreciate on a very personal level. And then third, Roxanne Logan, who is, of these three, certainly the person I knew the best. I worked with Roxanne on a number of projects through her involvement with Together Oklahoma, which is part of Oklahoma Policy Institute, and with the League of Women Voters and many other allies and civic groups. If there was a Zoom meeting that dealt with community engagement or the future of our state, Roxanne was going to be on it. We met in person several times, but she lived in a more rural area, and golly, a great reminder that we need to do more outreach to rural areas because there are hardworking, caring, tremendous people everywhere, and we can't just focus on, the metropolitan areas. She was amazing. I will miss her sense of humor and her sense of purpose in this work. She worked most closely with OK Policy and Together Oklahoma, and they have a really excellent post on their website that I'm just going to read to you real quick because it's really good, and it says everything I would love to say much more eloquently and more personally. So this is from their post on January 7th, remembering our colleague Roxanne Logan. We wanted to share with our OK Policy and Together Oklahoma communities about the death of our colleague and friend, Roxanne Logan, who passed away on December 30th after a short illness. Roxanne was a longtime Ardmore resident. She joined OK Policy in the spring of 2020 as its Southeast Regional Organizer for Together Oklahoma, which is OK Policy's grassroots or advocacy arm. Before joining the organization, Roxanne volunteered to help spearhead Together Oklahoma activities in Carter County and to establish our rural outreach program. Growing up in Norman during the 1960s, Roxanne would tell folks that she was raised by parents who helped her become an independent thinker in a time of great political upheaval. As a result, she knocked doors for former presidential candidate George McGovern, and she participated in protests against the Vietnam War while she was a student at the University of Oklahoma. In her online bio, Roxanne noted that this period was marked by activism for the greater good, especially within the Black community and women's rights organizations, as folks worked to gain their civil rights, pursue equality, and create better opportunities for themselves and others. She would have been the first to point out that these struggles continue today and that these issues require more action from her fellow Oklahomans. In addition to organizing advocates in Southeast Oklahoma, Roxanne also led Together Oklahoma's Safe Communities criminal justice statewide affinity group that worked to reform the state's justice system. Oklahoma Policy's legislative and outreach director, Angela Monson, worked alongside Roxanne for years. Roxanne was a fighter, especially when it came to making sure all Oklahomans had equal access to justice and ensuring Oklahoma's justice-involved individuals could access the resources they needed to thrive, Monson said. Leaving things better than we found them is a wonderful goal in life, and everyone who knew Roxanne can attest that she certainly left it better than she found it. Our OK Policy and Together Oklahoma staff remember Roxanne as a passionate advocate who always worked to amplify the voices of rural Oklahomans. Through her tireless persistence, she helped ensure that rural Oklahomans could tell lawmakers and decision-makers how state policies could work on behalf of all residents. Our hearts are heavy with her absence, and we send our thoughts to everyone who was fortunate enough to have known her as a friend and a colleague. That was beautiful. All right. Well, as we wrap up, at the beginning of this episode, I mentioned there would be some important dates and events coming up this month, and I told you to grab a pen and paper, and now is the time to use that. 3 things, 3 candidate forums. These are all nonpartisan. These are all community-based, usually, and they're all done like in a collaborative spirit. 1 for the Norman mayor's race, 1 for Oklahoma County Commissioner, and 1 for Oklahoma City Council, Ward 7. Here are the details. Norman will be electing a new mayor next month in February. The League of Women Voters of Norman and the Pioneer Library System are co-hosting a candidate forum next Monday, January 13th at 6 p.m. It'll be held in the Norman City Council chambers at 201 West Gray Street in Norman. It will also be streamed on Facebook if you can't make it in person. Oklahoma County will be electing a new county commissioner for District 1, which was previously held by Carrie Bloomert before she resigned to be the CEO of the Mental Health Association of Oklahoma. There will be a candidate forum on Thursday, January 16th. That's next Thursday at 7 p.m. at We the People Consulting, which is at 228 Southwest 25th Street in Oklahoma City. Let's Fix This, is a partner for that forum. We are also a partner for a candidate forum for Oklahoma City City Council Ward 7, which was formerly held by Nikki Nice before she got elected to the state Senate. That's 2 weeks later on Thursday, January 30th at 7 p.m. at the Northeast OKC Renaissance offices, 1740 Northeast 23rd Street. Both those events are hosted by a team of organizations, including Homebase, Foundation for Liberating Minds, Matriarch, Dream Action Oklahoma, Live Free OKC, Northeast OKC Neighborhood Coalition, Progress OKC, Northeast OKC Renaissance, the Julius Jones Institute, Let's Fix This, the Oklahoma Center for Community and Justice, and Vote for Change. We will also send out all the details. In case you didn't catch all of that, we'll send out the details for all those events via email later today. We'll post it on social media as well. If you haven't yet subscribed to our email list, you definitely should. It is the best way to stay in the loop about what we and our partners are doing. Head over to letsfixthis.org right now, and you'll get a little pop-up box that will ask you to sign up for updates. Do that, and we'll keep you in the loop. We're not going to sell it either. We don't give away our email list. That's ours. Your name is safe with us. All right. Well, on that note, that brings us to the end of the episode. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being engaged on these issues that matter most to our state, to our people. Thank you for caring about democracy and for all the ways that you, as a citizen of this great nation and this great state, put in the work to make democracy more fair, more representative, and more equitable for all. Remember, decisions are made by those who show up. We'll see you next week.